He wasn't just a millionaire. He was a king, and his kingdom was a glittering empire of glass and steel, built on his own genius. Malric Thorne, CEO of Aurasphere, had it all: the sprawling Manhattan penthouse, the respect of Wall Street, and a beautiful wife, Soraya, who was the perfect ornament to his perfect life. He thought she was content in her gilded cage, occupied with charities and galas, oblivious to his indiscretions. He believed she knew nothing of the late-night meetings, the secret credit cards, or the ambitious young protégé he was grooming. He was wrong. He drastically underestimated the woman who shared his bed, and in the world of high finance, there is no currency more valuable than knowledge. This is the story of how a woman pushed to the edge didn't just get even. She took everything. The air in the penthouse atop the Olympia Tower was always a perfect climate-controlled 72 degrees. It was an atmosphere as meticulously managed as the life of the man who owned it, Malric Thorne. From this perch, 80 stories above Central Park, Malric could survey his kingdom. The city lights glittered below a sprawling constellation of lesser stars, all orbiting his magnificent sun. At 45, Malric possessed the kind of ruthless charm that Wall Street both feared and revered. His company Aurasphere, a revolutionary AI-driven branding firm, had reshaped modern advertising. It was his vision, his creation, and his alone. His wife, Soraya Vance Thorne, was in his eyes the most exquisite of his acquisitions. With a serene beauty that defied her 42 years and a lineage that traced back to the Mayflower, she was the embodiment of old money grace. She ran their homes, the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, the chalet in Aspen, with an effortless efficiency that Malric took for granted. He saw her life as a series of pleasant, inconsequential tasks, approving menus for dinner parties, chairing committees for art galas, and raising their 2 children, Leo 17 and Chloe 15. He loved her, or at least he loved the idea of her. She was the perfect partner for the Malric Thorne brand. This evening was typical. Malric strode into the apartment, the scent of the city clinging to his Tom Ford suit. He loosened his tie, a slash of navy silk, and dropped his briefcase by the door. Soraya, his voice boomed, expecting her to appear as she always did. She emerged from the hallway that led to the children's rooms, a soft smile on her lips. She was dressed in a simple cream-colored cashmere dress, her honey-blonde hair pulled back in a loose chignon. "Hello, darling. Tough day." "The usual battles," he said, accepting the crystal tumbler of Macallan 25 she offered. He kissed her cheek, a perfunctory gesture. "The board is getting jittery about the Q3 projections. I had to remind them who built this company from a garage in Queens into a global powerhouse." He took a long swallow of the scotch, the warmth spreading through his chest. "They're sheep, all of them." "Well, you're their shepherd," she said, smoothly, her voice a low, calming melody. "I'm sure you guided them masterfully." He grunted in response, his eyes already on his phone, scrolling through emails. He was only half listening. This was their nightly ritual, his grand pronouncements, her soothing affirmations. It was a script they had perfected over 2 decades of marriage. But tonight, a discordant note had already been played hours before he'd arrived home. Earlier that afternoon, Soraya had been reviewing the household's monthly statements. It was a task she performed with the same meticulous attention she gave to everything else. She wasn't just checking for fraud. She was a connoisseur of their financial life, an expert in the intricate dance of their wealth. She clicked open the statement for the Onyx Centurion card, the one Malric used for his personal expenses. The charges were a familiar litany of luxury lunches at the Grill, a new Patek Philippe watch, flights to London. And then she saw it. A charge for $15,000 from a jeweler she didn't recognize Serafina's atelier. It was a boutique, highly exclusive, known for its modern bespoke pieces. It wasn't Malric's style. He preferred the established gravitas of Tiffany or Cartier for the gifts he bought her. This was different, more intimate, more personal. The charge was dated 3 weeks ago, the day of their anniversary. The Patek Philippe was his anniversary gift to himself. The gift he had given her was a handsome but standard check for her preferred charity. Her heart, for the first time in a long time, beat a sharp, painful rhythm against her ribs. It wasn't the money. The money was meaningless, a drop in an endless ocean. It was the name, Serafina. It sounded young, ethereal. It sounded like everything she wasn't. She closed the laptop, her hands perfectly steady. She walked to the vast window and looked down at the city. From up here, the people were ants, their lives a chaotic, indecipherable scurry. For years, she had felt a similar detachment floating above the messy realities of life in her bubble of privilege. But now, a crack had appeared in the glass. Later that evening, as Malric continued to tap at his phone, Soraya watched him. She studied the familiar lines of his face, the strong jaw, the confident set of his mouth, the faint lines around his eyes that crinkled when he was truly amused, a sight she hadn't seen directed at her in years. "Anything exciting happening at the office?" she asked, her tone light, conversational. Malric looked up, a flicker of something annoyance in his eyes, before it was replaced by practiced indifference. "Big things on the horizon. We're about to land the LVMH digital account. It's a game changer." He paused, then added, "Katerina has been instrumental. A real killer instinct, that one. Reminds me of me 20 years ago. Katerina Petrova." The name was familiar. She was Malric's protégée, a sharp, raven-haired VP in her late 20s, who had risen through the ranks at Aurasphere with astonishing speed. Malric spoke of her, often praising her ambition, her relentless drive. Soraya had met her a few times at company events. She remembered a firm handshake, eyes that were a startling shade of cobalt blue, and a smile that didn't quite reach them. "That's wonderful, dear Soraya," said her own smile, a perfect, placid mask. "You must be very proud of her." "Proud isn't the word. She's an asset. A weapon." He corrected his focus, returning to his phone. "She's secured a preliminary meeting in Paris next month. We'll need to fly out Charm Bernard Arnault himself." Paris, the city where they had honeymooned. The pieces began to click into place, forming a picture she didn't want to see, but could no longer ignore. The late nights, he claimed, were spent at the office, the faint, unfamiliar scent of perfume on his shirts, the new, almost manic energy he had lately. And now, a $15,000 piece of bespoke jewelry from an atelier called Serafina's, and a business trip to Paris with his brilliant, beautiful weapon. The pain was sharp, a physical blow. But beneath it, something else stirred. A cold, quiet rage. An emotion she had suppressed for so long she had almost forgotten its existence. Malric had made his fatal error. It wasn't the cheating. It was the assumption that she was a fool. He looked at her and saw a decorative object, a beautifully maintained piece of property. He had forgotten who she was before she became Mrs. Thorne. He had forgotten about Soraya Vance. Soraya Vance, who had graduated top of her class at Columbia Law. Soraya Vance, who had passed the New York bar exam with one of the highest scores in the state. Soraya Vance, who had put a ferociously promising career in corporate litigation on hold to raise his children and build his world because he had asked her to, had promised her it would be their shared kingdom. He had forgotten that she knew exactly how kingdoms were built, and she knew exactly how they were brought to ruin. That night, for the first time in years, Soraya did not go to bed with her husband. She waited until the sound of his light snoring echoed from the master bedroom. Then she slipped into his home office, a sanctuary of leather and mahogany he believed was his alone. She sat in his oversized chair, the leather cool against her skin, and turned on his computer. His password, she knew, was the name of the first boat he ever owned, Invictus. The irony was not lost on her, unconquered. She navigated silently through his files, her fingers flying across the keyboard with a muscle memory she thought was long gone. She wasn't looking for love letters or explicit photos. Amateurs looked for proof of an affair. Soraya was looking for proof of a crime. She opened the corporate expense ledgers, the offshore account statements, the intercompany fund transfers. She was no longer a wife. She was a forensic investigator, and her husband's life was the crime scene. It didn't take long. Malric was arrogant, and arrogance bred carelessness. He had become so comfortable in his deceit that he had stopped covering his tracks with any real diligence. She found a recurring payment, a consulting fee of $50,000 a month, being funneled from Aurasphere's marketing budget to a shell corporation, Petrova Global Strategies LLC. The registered agent was Katerina Petrova. The company was less than 6 months old. It had no other clients, no website, no physical address beyond a P.O. box in Delaware. It was a ghost, a phantom entity created for the sole purpose of siphoning money from Aurasphere. He wasn't just sleeping with his protégé. He was embezzling company funds to bankroll her. The rage she felt was now a pure crystalline thing. It was no longer hot. It was ice cold. He was using the company she had sacrificed her own ambitions for to build a new life for another woman. He was stealing from their children's legacy. She copied the files onto a small encrypted flash drive. Then she wiped the computer's recent activity log with a few keystrokes. She slipped out of the office, as silent as a wraith, and returned to the guest room she had prepared for herself. She lay in the dark, the flash drive clutched in her hand. It felt heavy, a small, dense weight of betrayal and opportunity. The pain was still there, a dull ache in her chest. But the path forward was starting to become clear. Malric thought he was the king, the shepherd, the master of his universe. He had no idea that a quiet rebellion was already underway. He had no idea that the woman he dismissed as a sheep was in fact a wolf, and she was about to take back the kingdom. The days that followed were a masterclass in deception, but the performance was Soraya's, not Malric's. On the surface, nothing changed. She was the picture of serene domesticity. She hosted a flawless luncheon for the board members' wives, discussing summer plans in the Hamptons and the merits of various auction houses. She helped Chloe with her history project on the fall of the Roman Empire, drawing parallels between imperial hubris and modern-day titans with a wry subtlety that was lost on her daughter, but not on herself. She played tennis with her friends at the club, her backhand as strong and reliable as ever. To Malric, she was the same predictable, placid Soraya. He remained blissfully unaware, wrapped in the cocoon of his own self-importance. He would breeze in late from the office, smelling of the city and Cat's Chanel No. 5, and offer a cursory explanation. "Sorry, darling. Closing the LVMH deal is a beast. Cat and I were buried in strategy decks. As long as you're slaying dragons, my dear Soraya," would reply, her smile never faltering. "Don't forget the gala for the Met on Friday. You promised you'd be on your best behavior." Inside, however, Soraya was a whirlwind of cold, calculated activity. The guest room had become her war room. Each night after the house fell silent, she would lock the door and get to work. The flash drive was her Rosetta Stone, and with every file she decrypted, a clearer picture of Malric's treachery emerged. The Shell Corporation was just the beginning. He had been sloppy. The $50,000 a month was the baseline, but there were other more egregious expenditures. He had used the Aurasphere corporate jet for a client meeting in St. Bart's that coincided perfectly with Katerina's birthday, documented on her Instagram, with a photo of her on a yacht captioned, "Best birthday, surprise ever." Feeling so blessed, he had expensed a down payment on a luxury condo in Soho, classifying it as a corporate retainer property. But the deed Soraya found through public records was in Katerina's name. He wasn't just funding her lifestyle. He was building her an empire in miniature, a shadow kingdom funded by his own. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. It was a betrayal not just of her, but of his employees, his shareholders, and the legacy his own father had helped him build. Aurasphere hadn't started in a garage in Queens. That was a piece of corporate mythology Malric had spun for journalists. It had been started by his father, Robert Thorne, a decent, hard-working man who had built a respectable marketing firm. Malric, with his tech-savvy and aggressive vision, had transformed it, rocketing it into the stratosphere. But he had forgotten the foundation of integrity his father had laid. Soraya knew she needed more than evidence of embezzlement. To truly remove him to protect the company from the fallout of a messy public scandal, she needed leverage. Overwhelming, undeniable, and absolute. That's when she called Marcus Ryland. Marcus had been her best friend at Columbia Law. A sharp, scrupulous man who had resisted the siren song of corporate law to become a partner at a small but formidable firm specializing in shareholder litigation. They had stayed in touch over the years, a bond of intellectual respect and genuine affection remaining between them. She met him not at his office, but at a quiet, dusty bookshop in the West Village that they both loved. Amidst the comforting scent of old paper and ink, she laid out her story. She spoke in a low, even tone, presenting the facts without emotion, as if she were briefing him on a case. She handed him a copy of the flash drive. Marcus listened, his expression growing more grim with every detail. He had never liked Malric, had always seen the brittle ego beneath the charisma. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, looking at the woman before him. The years of playing the perfect society wife had softened her features, but now he could see the brilliant, tenacious lawyer he once knew re-emerging like a photograph developing in a dark room. "Soraya," he said, his voice laced with concern. "This is explosive. Embezzlement, corporate fraud. This goes far beyond a divorce settlement. If this gets out, it could destroy Aurasphere. The stock will plummet. The SEC will launch an investigation. Malric will likely face prison time." "I'm aware of that," Soraya replied, her gaze unwavering. "I have no desire to see the company my children stand to inherit be destroyed by his recklessness, and I have no wish to see their father in prison. That would be a victory for no one." Marcus leaned forward. "Then what is the endgame here?" "What do you want?" "I don't want a settlement," she said, the words as hard as diamonds. "I don't want his money. I want the company." Marcus stared at her. "You want to oust him? A sitting CEO and founder. Soraya, the board is loyal to him. They'll circle the wagons to protect him and the company from a scandal. They'll paint you as a bitter, vengeful wife. That's why a public scandal is my last resort, not my opening salvo," she explained. "I need a weapon they can't ignore, something internal, something that makes removing him the only logical choice for the survival of the company." She paused, then asked the question that had been forming in her mind for days. "Marcus. When we got married, Malric was just taking over the company from his father. Robert was worried about Malric's ego, his spending habits. He insisted we sign a complex prenuptial agreement. Malric also set up a series of trusts for tax purposes. I signed dozens of documents. I was a lawyer, but I was also in love. I didn't scrutinize them as I should have." Her voice was calm, but Marcus could hear the undertone. "What are you thinking? I want you to pull every document related to my marriage and my holdings in Aura Sphere. Every trust agreement, every clause in the prenup, every share allocation document from the last 20 years. Malric thinks I own nothing. That everything is in his name or in trusts he controls. I want to know if he's right." For the next week, Marcus's team dug. They pulled records from law firms, accountancy offices, and state archives, and then he called her. His voice was electric. "Soraya, you need to come to my office, now." The conference room was stark and modern, a stark contrast to the cozy bookshop. Marcus laid a thick bound document on the polished table between them. It was the original Thorne Family Legacy Trust, established by Robert Thorne 2 years before his death. Robert was a shrewder man than Malric ever gave him credit for. Marcus began his finger tracing a line of dense legal text. He was worried about Malric's recklessness and potential for a messy divorce down the line. He wanted to protect the company and his grandchildren, so he structured the trust in a very peculiar way. He explained. Malric was the primary beneficiary and the managing trustee, giving him day-to-day control. He held a 40% stake of Aura Sphere's voting shares in his own name. However, Robert had placed another 35% of the company's shares into this irrevocable trust. The terms stated that upon Malric's death, or in the event of proven gross financial malfeasance or moral turpitude that threatens the stability of the company, control of the trust's shares would automatically transfer to a co-trustee. And who, Soraya asked, her breath catching in her throat, is the co-trustee Marcus turned the page and slid it across the table. There on a dusty signature line from nearly 15 years ago was her name, Soraya Vance Thorne. She stared at the signature, a younger, more hopeful version of her own handwriting. She remembered signing it vaguely. Malric had passed it off as a minor tax formality, a piece of estate planning. He had probably counted on her never looking at it again, or perhaps he himself had forgotten the exact clause, blinded by his own arrogance. His father had put a loaded gun in her hand, and Malric had just supplied the ammunition. With this, Marcus said, his voice low with awe, "You don't just have a complaint. You have a nuke. If you can prove the financial malfeasance to the other board members, you can invoke this clause. Their fiduciary duty would be to the company, not to Malric. You would control 35% of the shares. Combined with a few allied board members, you would have a voting majority." Soraya leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking softly. The path was now brilliantly, terrifyingly clear. She wouldn't need to go to the press. She wouldn't need to file for divorce. This would be a battle fought not in a courtroom, but in the one place Malric felt most invincible, the boardroom. There are 5 other members on the board besides Malric, she said, her mind already working. 2 are his cronies, Barry Lang and Michael Chen. They'll stand by him no matter what. That leaves 3. Who are they? Marcus asked, grabbing a legal pad. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a tech futurist from Stanford. She's pragmatic, unsentimental. She cares about one thing: shareholder value and stability. Then there's General Mark O'Brien, retired 4-star. He's the ethics and governance chair, a man of unimpeachable integrity. He despises scandal. Soraya paused, thinking of the final, crucial piece. And then there's Alistair Finch. Alistair was the oldest member of the board, in his late 70s. He had been Robert Thorne's best friend and right-hand man. He had stayed on as a favor to Robert to provide a steadying hand for his brilliant but volatile son. Alistair loved Malric, but he had revered Robert. Alistair is the key. Soraya said, a plan solidifying in her mind. Evelyn Reed will follow the logic. General O'Brien will follow the ethics. But Alistair Finch, Alistair will follow his loyalty to my father-in-law. I need to convince him that I am honoring Robert's legacy and Malric is the one destroying it. How will you do that? A slow, determined smile touched Soraya's lips for the first time in weeks. By arranging a little chat, it's time I stopped playing the part of the perfect wife and started reminding people what a Vance from Columbia Law is capable of. The first move in a war is never a frontal assault. It is a quiet repositioning of pieces, a subtle shift in the balance of power that goes unnoticed by the enemy. Soraya Thorne. With the Thorne Family Legacy Trust document as her guide, began her campaign not with a declaration of war, but with a cup of tea. Her target was Alistair Finch. At 78, Alistair was the grand old man of Aurasphere's board, a living link to the company's more modest, honorable past. He lived in a stately pre-war building on Park Avenue, a world away from Malric's sterile, modern penthouse. Soraya knew that a direct, aggressive approach would backfire. Alistair's loyalty to the Thorne name was deep, and he viewed Malric as a surrogate son. She couldn't attack Malric. She had to present herself as the savior of Robert Thorne's true vision. She called him on his private line, her voice warm and tinged with a carefully calibrated note of concern. Alistair, it's Soraya Thorne. I do hope I'm not disturbing you. I was hoping I might be able to steal a moment of your time. I have some concerns about the company's direction, and I so value the perspective you always brought to Robert. The use of her father-in-law's name was deliberate, a key inserted into a lock she hoped would turn. It did. Alistair, flattered and intrigued, invited her for tea the following afternoon. She arrived at his apartment dressed not in her usual couture, but in a simple, elegant navy blue dress. It was a costume of quiet competence, of serious purpose. Alistair greeted her warmly, his kind, wrinkled eyes filled with affection. Soraya, my dear, you look wonderful. Worried about the company. Don't tell me Malric's ambition is finally giving you grey hairs. Something like that, she said, with a soft smile, accepting a cup of Earl Grey. They sat in his library surrounded by leather-bound books and photos of a younger Alistair with Robert Thorne, the two of them beaming on a sailboat. For 20 minutes, Soraya let Alistair talk. She listened patiently as he reminisced about the old days, about Robert's integrity, about their shared dream of building a company that was not just profitable, but respectable. Then at the right moment, she gently guided the conversation. Robert was always so concerned with legacy. Wasn't he? She began. He believed a company's reputation was its most valuable asset, more than its stock price or its market share. Absolutely, Alistair agreed, nodding emphatically. He used to say, "You can earn back money, but you can't earn back trust." Malric is brilliant, a genius even, but sometimes I worry he forgets that. This was her opening. "That's why I'm here, Alistair," she said, her voice dropping to a confidential tone. "I'm worried that Malric is exposing the company to a level of risk that Robert never would have countenanced, a risk that could tarnish his entire legacy." She didn't present the evidence of the affair. That would seem petty personal. Instead, she framed it as a matter of corporate governance and financial recklessness. She spoke of a shell corporation, of significant funds being diverted without board oversight, of a key employee being given preferential financial treatment that amounted to embezzlement. She used phrases like fiduciary irresponsibility and potential for catastrophic reputational damage. She didn't mention Katerina Petrova by name. She simply referred to a senior executive. Alistair's expression shifted from paternal warmth to sharp concern. "Soraya, these are extremely serious allegations." "Do you have proof I do?" she said calmly. She slid a single discreet file folder across the antique coffee table. It contained printouts of the Shell Corporation's registration and a summary of the unexplained payments, stripped of any salacious details. It was a clean, clinical presentation of financial fraud. As Alistair read, his face grew pale. He recognized the danger immediately. This wasn't a marital squabble. This was a corporate time bomb. "And there's one more thing," Soraya said softly. She produced a copy of the Thorne Family Legacy Trust Agreement with the specific clause highlighted. Robert saw this possibility. He foresaw a day when Malric's ambition might get the better of his judgment. He put a fail-safe in place to protect the company, to protect his legacy. She pointed to the co-trustee's signature line. "He put his trust in me, Alistair." The old man stared at the document, his mind clearly reeling. He looked from the papers to the composed, determined woman sitting before him. He was seeing her for the first time not as Malric's beautiful wife, but as Robert Thorne's chosen guardian. The loyalty in his heart was being pulled in two different directions. But Soraya had framed the choice perfectly. He could be loyal to the son, or he could be loyal to the father's final wish. "What do you intend to do?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I intend to call an emergency board meeting," Soraya said. "I will present my evidence and invoke the clause in the trust. I will assume control of the 35% stake, and I will ask the board to vote to remove Malric as CEO and install an interim leader to stabilize the company and conduct a full internal audit." "And who would you propose as this interim leader?" Alistair asked, his eyes searching hers. "Me," she said, without a trace of hesitation. The audacity of it hung in the air. But she followed it immediately with logic. "I am the only one who can do it without triggering a public scandal. It can be framed as a family matter, a temporary shift in leadership for personal reasons. I have the legal standing through the trust. I have a law degree from Columbia. And most importantly, my sole priority would be to clean this up and protect the company that bears my children's name. I am not an outsider. I am a thorn." Alistair leaned back, the weight of the decision settling on his frail shoulders. He saw the abyss Malric was leading them toward, and he saw the lifeline Soraya was offering. It was a coup, yes, but it was a coup designed to save the kingdom, not burn it down. "Robert always did say you were the smartest of the bunch," he murmured, more to himself than to her. He looked at her, a new respect dawning in his eyes. "You'll have my support, Soraya. For Robert, 1 down, 2 to go." Her meeting with Dr. Evelyn Reed was entirely different. It took place in a sterile conference room at a neutral law office. There was no tea, no pleasantries. Evelyn, a sharp woman in her 50s with a geometric haircut and an intense analytical gaze, got straight to the point. "Mrs. Thorne, I have 15 minutes between calls. I was told this was a matter of urgent corporate governance." Soraya, adapting her strategy, presented an even more streamlined version of the facts. She handed Evelyn an iPad already queued to a presentation detailing the flow of funds from Aurasphere to Petrova Global Strategies. She highlighted the lack of deliverables, the clear pattern of embezzlement, and the potential SEC violations. She concluded with the bottom-line risk analysis. "The exposure here is incalculable," Soraya stated. "If this becomes public, we're looking at a 50–60% drop in stock value overnight. We'll lose the LVMH contract before it's even signed. We'll be buried in shareholder lawsuits and federal investigations. The company as we know it will cease to exist." Evelyn scrolled through the data, her face impassive. She was a creature of numbers and logic, and the numbers were undeniable. "And your solution?" Evelyn asked, not looking up from the iPad. "A clean internal transfer of power. I invoke a controlling interest via a family trust, a fact my legal counsel has confirmed. I take over as interim CEO. Malric Thorne steps down for health and personal reasons. We hire an outside firm to conduct a forensic audit under my supervision, and we quietly claw back every cent that was misappropriated. We terminate the executive involved. No scandal, no press. The stock dips by maybe 5% on the leadership change, and then it recovers when we show stability and continuity. It is the only move that guarantees shareholder value is protected." Evelyn finally looked up, her sharp eyes boring into Soraya's. She wasn't assessing Soraya's pain or her motives. She was assessing her competence. "You believe you are qualified to run a multi-billion-dollar tech firm?" "I believe I am qualified to manage a crisis," Soraya corrected her. "My first act will be to empower the existing capable leadership, the COO, the CTO, who have been marginalized by Malrix's increasingly erratic behavior. My job is not to design AI algorithms. My job is to restore integrity and stability. And yes, in that I am eminently qualified." Evelyn was silent for a full minute. She tapped the iPad, then switched it off. "Your logic is sound," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "The current path presents an unacceptable level of risk. Your proposed solution mitigates that risk effectively. You will have my vote, Mrs. Thorne. Not for your sake or for Malric's, but for the sake of the company's balance sheet. 2 down." The final piece was General O'Brien. Soraya knew he was the ethics chair for a reason. He was a man who lived by a rigid code of honor. She requested a video call with him, knowing he was at his ranch in Montana. On the screen, his face was weathered, his posture ramrod straight, even when seated. She didn't try to appeal to legacy or to finance. She appealed to his code. "General," she began respectfully, "I am coming to you as the chair of the Ethics and Governance Committee because I have uncovered a profound breach of ethics at the highest level of Aurasphere." She laid out the case this time, emphasizing the moral failure. She spoke of the trust placed in a CEO, the duty to his employees and shareholders. She described the deceit, the creation of a fraudulent entity to enrich an employee with whom she finally admitted Malric was having an affair. She painted a picture of a leader whose personal corruption had now become a corporate disease. This is not just about money, General, she said, her voice filled with conviction. It is about a rot at the core of the company. It is about a leader who has abandoned his own code of conduct. If the board knows of this and does nothing, then we are all complicit. We are violating the very principles your committee exists to uphold. General O'Brien's face was like granite. He had seen corruption in war-torn countries and in the halls of power. He recognized it instantly. What you're describing, Mrs. Thorne, is a catastrophic failure of leadership. It is dishonorable. It is, she agreed. The trust agreement his father created gives me the authority to force a change. But I need the board to sanction it, to make it an orderly transition, not a chaotic mess. I need your vote to uphold the honor of this company. The general did not need to deliberate. For him, it was a simple matter of right and wrong. A leader who has lost his honor cannot lead. He said, his voice like gravel. You do what you must, Mrs. Thorne. You will have my vote. The alliance was forged. 3 key votes secured, joining her own impending 35% stake. She now controlled the board. The trap was set. All that was left was to summon the king into the throne room and announce that he had been deposed. Soraya instructed Marcus to have the corporate council officially call an emergency board meeting for the next day at 10:00 a.m. The reason cited was vague and ominous. To discuss a critical governance matter and a leadership challenge that has arisen. That night when Malric came home, he was in a foul mood. Can you believe this? He fumed, throwing his briefcase onto a chair. Some ridiculous emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning. No agenda, just some cryptic nonsense. It's probably Alistair getting his knickers in a twist about our risk profile again. I'll have to waste my morning placating that old fossil. Soraya simply poured him his scotch. I'm sure you'll handle it, darling, she said, her voice a perfect, soothing balm. Her eyes, however, held a glint of cold, hard steel. He had no idea he was talking to the very person who had called the meeting. He had no idea he was drinking a toast to his own downfall. Tomorrow, his reign would end. The Hiko Aura Sphere boardroom was Malric Thorne's cathedral, a top-floor symphony of polished obsidian and panoramic views. He strode in at 9:58 a.m., exuding an aura of annoyed but absolute control. He nodded curtly to the assembled members, a somber Alistair Finch, an unreadable Dr. Evelyn Reed, and a stern General O'Brien on the video screen. His loyalists Barry Lang and Michael Chen offered sycophantic smiles. All right, David, let's get this over with, Malric said, taking his seat at the head of the table. What's this critical governance matter? The company's general counsel. David Chen cleared his throat. Malric, the meeting was called at the request of a majority stakeholder to address a leadership challenge. Malric laughed, a short barking sound. A leadership challenge? I own 40% of this company. Who exactly is this majority stakeholder? As if on cue, the boardroom doors opened. Every head turned. Malric's smile froze, replaced by a look of utter bewilderment. Soraya Thorne walked in. She was dressed for battle in a charcoal grey power suit, her expression radiating a quiet authority that silenced the room. Beside her was Marcus Ryland, carrying a briefcase. Soraya, what in God's name are you doing here? Malric demanded, his voice a mixture of anger and confusion. This is a closed board meeting. I'm aware. Soraya said, her voice cool and steady as she took a seat opposite him. She didn't look at her husband. She addressed the board. Good morning. I am here today in my capacity as co-trustee of the Thorne Family Legacy Trust. Malric's face flushed. The Legacy Trust. That's a family matter, Soraya. It has no bearing here. Leave before you embarrass yourself. On the contrary, Soraya replied, her gaze finally locking with his. The cold fire in her eyes made him flinch. The trust is precisely why we are here. It holds a 35% stake in Aura Sphere's voting shares, and it contains Clause 7b, which stipulates that in the event of proven gross financial malfeasance by the managing trustee, control of the shares transfers immediately to the co-trustee. As of this morning, I am invoking that clause. A wave of shock rippled through the room. Malric's confusion curdled into rage. Proven malfeasance. That's a slanderous accusation. You have no proof. This is a pathetic attempt to get a bigger divorce settlement, isn't it? This has nothing to do with divorce, Malric Soraya said, her tone cutting. This is about your crimes against this company. Marcus Ryland spoke for the first time, his voice calm and authoritative as he distributed thin folders. We have prepared a full dossier for each of you. You will find complete documentation of a shell corporation, Petrova Global Strategies LLC, created by Mr. Thorne, to funnel company funds to a subordinate Ms. Katerina Petrova. At the mention of Kat's name, the color drained from Malric's face. The dossier includes, Marcus continued as a damning flowchart appeared on the main screen. Proof of over $2 million in embezzled funds. This includes a monthly consulting fee, as well as payments for real estate and luxury travel, all falsified as business expenses. This is taken out of context, Malric sputtered, scrambling. Kat Petrova is a key strategic partner. These were retainer fees. Dr. Evelyn Reed spoke, her voice sharp and clinical. Mr. Thorne, the board never approved this partnership. I find it curious that this partner has no other clients and no tangible deliverables associated with $2 million in payments. Malric's eyes darted around the room, looking for an ally. He found none. Soraya let the evidence hang in the air before delivering the next blow. This isn't just about the money, it's about the risk. The LVMH deal, I spoke with their general counsel yesterday. I explained that Aura Sphere was addressing a serious internal governance issue. They have officially put all negotiations on hold, pending the outcome of this meeting. That was the kill shot. The news that his magnum opus was in jeopardy, and that Soraya was the cause, left him speechless. You did what he whispered. I acted to protect the company. Soraya stated, her voice ringing with authority. Something you, as CEO, should have done. She turned back to the board. The situation is clear. Our CEO has committed fraud. His actions constitute gross financial malfeasance. Therefore, I am formally assuming control of the trust's 35% of voting shares. Combined with my personal shares, I now control 37% of this company. She looked directly at her husband, whose face was a mask of disbelief, hatred, and raw fear. I now call for a vote of no confidence in CEO Malric Thorne, Soraya announced, and a subsequent vote to immediately terminate his employment for cause. This is insane, Barry Lang stammered, but his voice was drowned out by Soraya's focus. The vote, please, she commanded. All those in favor of no confidence. Soraya raised her hand. Slowly, Alistair Finch raised his. Dr. Evelyn Reed's hand went up instantly. On the screen, General O'Brien raised his. A clear majority. The motion carries. Soraya said, her voice a statement of fact. Now the vote for termination for cause. The same 4 hands went up. The motion carries, she stated again. Malric Thorne is hereby removed as CEO effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. It was over. Malric sat stunned, the arrogance stripped away, leaving only a hollowed-out shell. He rose slowly, his chair scraping loudly in the silent room. He looked at Alistair with eyes full of betrayal, then at his wife. "You," he hissed the word filled with venom. "You did this." No Malric, Soraya replied, her expression unyielding. "You did this to yourself." I just turned on the lights. 2 uniformed security guards entered the room. The humiliation was absolute. Without another word, Malric allowed them to lead him out of his cathedral. The boardroom doors clicked shut behind him, sealing his fate. In the silence, Soraya Thorne remained standing. She had won the war. Now she had to rule the kingdom. The fall of a king, however, just is never a quiet affair. While Soraya had contained the explosion within the boardroom, the shockwaves were immediate. Malric, his face a mask of rage, was met at the curb not by his driver, but by a process server. He was handed a thick envelope containing a temporary restraining order, barring him from all Aurasphere properties and the initial divorce filings. Soraya had been methodical. She had decapitated his professional and personal life in a single surgical strike. His assets were frozen. The corporate cards were cancelled, the accounts linked to Petrova Global strategies locked down. Malric, a man who had never considered the price of anything, was suddenly locked out of his own immense fortune. He was a king in exile. Katerina Petrova's downfall was equally swift. She was fired via a sterile email from HR for gross misconduct. Her corporate pass was deactivated, and when she tried to call Malric, the number was already disconnected. She had been an expendable pawn. An eviction notice was taped to the door of the Soho condo, a stark reminder that her dreams of a shared empire had been built on a foundation of corporate fraud. The news of Malric's sudden resignation for personal reasons hit the financial wires by noon, causing a controlled dip in Aurasphere's stock. The official press release announcing Soraya Thorne as interim CEO stressed continuity and her commitment to the founding principles of the Thorne family legacy. The markets, calmed by statements of support from Evelyn Reed and Alistair Finch, were wary, but did not panic. The ship was taking on water, but Soraya was already at the helm. Her first act as CEO was to convene Aurasphere's senior executives. In the now liberated boardroom, she offered them something they hadn't had in years: respect. Malric Thorne was the face of this company, but you were its heart and its brain, she told them, her tone direct and sincere. As of today, this is a collaborative leadership. My job is not to micromanage you. My job is to clear away the rot and empower you to do what you do best. She announced a full independent audit, promising transparency and a commitment to restoring integrity. The executives, long accustomed to Malric's volatile ego, felt a palpable sense of relief. It was a new era. The home front was a different kind of battlefield. The penthouse, once a symbol of success, now felt like a cold museum of a dead marriage. She found her children waiting, the silence thick with questions. Leo, 17, and his father's son, was furious. "Dad called me," he said, his voice accusatory. "He said you stole his company. Is it true?" Before Soraya could answer, Chloe, 15, and quietly perceptive, interjected. "Dad hasn't been home for dinner in months, Leo. He's been working late, constantly. He's a CEO. He's busy, Leo shot back. Soraya sat down, weary from the day's battles. She had to make them understand. What I did, she said, her voice firm, was not to hurt your father. It was to protect this family and the company that is your legacy. Your father was making choices that were putting everything at risk. He broke important rules, and a leader must be held accountable, no matter who they are. Leo, unable to reconcile his image of a powerful father with this story of failure, stormed off to his room. Chloe, however, moved closer and took her mother's hand. It was a small gesture, an anchor of support in a turbulent sea. The battle for her son's understanding would be long, but for now, she had her daughter. Days turned into weeks, and Soraya worked relentlessly. She was the first in the office and the last to leave, poring over reports and meeting with department heads. The audit she initiated uncovered that Malric had been far more reckless than she'd known, using the company as his personal piggy bank in dozens of ways. Slowly, she won the respect of her new colleagues. She wasn't the charismatic visionary Malric had been, but she was the steady, ethical leader the company desperately needed. The stock stabilized, then began to climb. She impressed the leadership at LVMH with her candid updates on the audit, leaving the door to their partnership slightly ajar. Malric, meanwhile, was spiraling. Cut off from his money and power, he hired a bulldog of a divorce lawyer preparing for a scorched earth fight. He tried to rally support, painting Soraya as a power-hungry shrew. But the doors of his former allies were closed. He had been a man defined by his power, and without it, he was a ghost. About a month after the coup, Soraya was working late in her new office. The panoramic view of the city no longer felt like a monument to one man's ego, but a station of immense responsibility. Her phone rang, an unsaved number. She answered. "You think you've won, don't you?" Malric's voice was raw with bitterness. "It was never about winning, Malric," she said tiredly. "You took everything from me," he seethed. "My company, my money, my son. You gave it away, Malric. You gave it all away the moment you decided the rules didn't apply to you," she replied, her voice steady. "The company is stable. The children are safe. That's all that matters." There was a pause, then a low, chilling laugh. "This isn't over, Soraya. You may be sitting in my chair, but you will never be safe there. I built that kingdom. I can still burn it to the ground. You watch your back." He hung up. Soraya stood in the silent office, the city lights twinkling below. The threat did not frighten her. It clarified things. She had done what was necessary, excising a cancer from her company and her life. But Malric was right. This was not the end. It was merely the end of the beginning. She had won the battle for Aurasphere, but an exiled king stripped of everything is the most dangerous man of all. The war for her future was far from over. So the king was dethroned, and the underestimated queen took her seat at the head of the table. Soraya Thorne's story is a masterclass in quiet strength and strategic revenge. But as Malric's final chilling threat proves, a victory is rarely the end of the story. Can Soraya transform from a crisis manager into a true visionary leader? And what desperate, destructive moves will a man with nothing left to lose make to reclaim his lost kingdom? The battle for the boardroom is over, but the war for the Thorne legacy has just begun. If you were captivated by this story of betrayal, empowerment, and high-stakes justice, please let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in Soraya's position? Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed the drama, share it with someone who loves a good story of karma, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss the next chapter in this real-life drama.